You might believe what a lot of people believe, which is that when it comes to questions of LGBTQ Christians, there are only two approaches. One is the accepted theology of the church, that same-sex marriage and transgender identity are not okay. And the other is the affirming position, that same-sex marriage and transgender identity are completely okay and celebrated. And the truth is, there are some shades of gray here that are extremely important. So let's get into it. On the extreme end is the belief that gay people and trans people need to be fixed, so they are no longer gay or trans. Now, this could mean that they need to be fixed by becoming heterosexual, and this equates heterosexuality to holiness and is a way of really almost idolizing heterosexuality and heterosexual marriage. But the other, perhaps a little bit more subtle, is that maybe you can't become straight, but you need to at least not be gay. So the phrase often that epitomizes this is that the opposite of homosexuality is not heterosexuality, it's holiness. And the idea is that if you are gay, or if you're bisexual, or if you're transgender, that's the opposite of being holy. So maybe you can't be heterosexual, but you can at least not be gay. This focus is all on changing the very nature of LGBTQ people so that they are no longer LGBTQ. This is sometimes called side X, because it refers to the ex-gay movement. The second approach acknowledges that some people do have same-sex attraction that is persistent through a lifetime, that can't be changed no matter how much they pray. You can't pray away the gay. But they would add that if you are part of the LGBTQ community, you should not identify yourself as such, because to identify as such is to identify with your sin. That is what they say. So you could maybe say that you're same-sex attracted. I'm not sure how substantively that's different than saying that you're gay, but they feel that it is. They feel that to say that you're gay is the problem. They kind of just want silence in the church about this subject. They don't really want it talked about. So this is often the position of, say, the Gospel Coalition or an organization like that. They usually opt for encouraging people with same-sex attraction to be quiet about it and just close it to a few people and wrestle with it and struggle with it, but not to identify as gay, bisexual, transgender, whatever the case may be. This is often referred to as side Y. And you'll notice I left the T out of that one. I didn't talk about people who are transgender, and that's because it's a whole different ballgame. Being trans is about just your sense of identity. People who are transgender and act as the gender they were assigned at birth. So someone who, they were born and the doctor said it's a boy, and they feel internally in their bones that they're a woman, but they act as a man every day. That's a whole different thing than being same-sex attracted. So to say I'm transgender really means I'm living out the gender that I feel in my bones and I know in my heart. It's not the same as being gay, where you can say you're gay and not have a relationship with the same sex. It's kind of very different in that respect. And I'm not even sure how to address that within some of these models, honestly. I think that's an open question that a lot of people are struggling with. Now I get to talk to you about an organization I absolutely love, Seventh-day Adventist Kinship International. They're especially focused on Adventists, people of Adventist heritage, or who are connected to Adventists and who are either allies or LGBTQ people themselves. They're an affirming organization, and they have meant the world to me. When I was first coming out, it was a really difficult time, and they were absolutely there for me. People from the organization talk to me. I'm a member, which gives me access to all kinds of social media groups. I watch their YouTube channels, the resources on their website. It's a fantastic organization. I suggest you check them out. Link in the show notes. Another question behind the question here is, what does sexual orientation even mean? To say that you're gay or bisexual or queer or pansexual, what does it even mean? To say you're gay, does that say an action? Does it mean, oh, I say I'm gay, and so that means I'm having sex with the same sex, or I say I'm bi, so that means I'm having sex with both sexes? What does it mean? And the truth is, and this is just a non-negotiable, that being gay is not a behavior. It's saying something about yourself, how you experience the world. It's not saying what you're doing. A sexual orientation and sexual behavior are different. People behave in all kinds of different ways. There are gay people who are in heterosexual relationships and they are not leaving them and they know they're gay. That definitely is a thing. So first of all, that perception is just wrong. But for others, saying you're gay or bi might refer instead to temptation. So it's to say I'm gay can be really summed up in that I have this temptation to do this thing that I believe is a sin, or to say I'm bi, I have this temptation to do this thing that I believe is a sin. And that's essentially what sexual orientation means. Okay, I get it. But let's move on to the next position. And this one, I think, will make sense in the context of this conversation. The next perspective is that it is okay to say I'm gay, I'm bisexual, I'm lesbian, that this is simply a description of who you are, and it's just living with integrity and being honest about how you experience life. It's okay to identify that way, but they still believe in the accepted theology of most conservative churches. So a gay person would be celibate. Somebody who is bi or pansexual would only be in a relationship if that works for them for the opposite gender and not for someone of the same gender. So that's a position that's often called side B. And it understands sexual orientation as much broader than just who you have sex with. So it's not just about your behavior and it's not just about temptation. Being gay or being bi is also about who you make friends with, how you explain to people who you are, and how you experience life. It might affect the way that you dress, or some of your mannerisms, or how you express yourself. It can reflect various aspects of your life and who you are, and it is a way to communicate who you are that goes beyond communicating your behaviors and goes beyond communicating your temptations. So they would often say that there are certain gifts that come with being LGB that people who are not don't have, and that they have something unique and special to offer the church. So a lot of these folks do a lot of work on explaining what it means to have really deep, spiritual, meaningful friendships with one another, or lifelong commitments that aren't marriage, what it means to be celibate and live that life well and with abundance. So these are the kinds of things that a lot of people are doing who identify as side B. And frankly, a lot of heterosexual Christians in conservative churches are very unkind to these folks. A lot of side B people are LGBT people who are living their lives and finding ways to live out with integrity their convictions. And they're often very misunderstood by the vast majority of the heterosexual church that does not understand our experience and often identifies as either side X or side Y. They want to fix us, or they just want us to be quiet. So those are the three different positions, and you can see those are dramatically different positions. Those are the three different positions that represent ways of different expressions of the church's accepted theology, that same-sex marriage is wrong and that transgender identity is wrong. And again, even for side B, the question of being side of transgender is quite a bit different. And those communities are struggling with that question because it is a lot harder. But let's move on to the other side and talk about what affirming theology can look like. Those of us who are affirming have a critique of side B that I think will be instructive for helping to understand what affirming theology looks like. So we do not see sexual orientation as only about sex. We agree and affirm with the side B folks that being gay, being bi, being pan, being lesbian is about much more than your sexual behavior or your sexual desires. It is, yes, it's about how you form friends. It's about who your people are. It's about how you express who you are. It's about how you often express your gender. Yes, it's all about all those things. But we also don't believe that you can take your sexual desire out of that picture, your romantic desire out of that picture. We don't think that it's the whole thing, but we think that the whole thing is dramatically altered if that piece isn't there. Because it's also about how, when we form families, how we form those families, what our partnerships look like. That's also what it's about. And even if you are single and celibate your whole life as a person who's fully affirming, which is entirely possible, you can be fully affirming and called to celibacy at the same time, that there is something fundamental in whether or not you affirm that desire as good rather than experiencing that desire as a temptation. That is something fundamental that impacts the way that you walk through the world and the way that you understand your sexuality. And that accepting your sexuality can't be separated out from that, because that desire is essentially good and it is pretty core to what it means to have a sexual orientation. So within that framework of affirming and affirming that at least to some degree that desire is good, there are a couple different positions. Some might believe in the idea of natural fallenness. So being naturally fallen is different from being morally fallen. So that's to say, God never intended this. We don't think that God ever intended same-sex attraction or transgender identity. But, sin happened, the world changed, but, it's not really a moral issue, because actually people's lives are better and people are better able to follow God if we do affirm that desire, if we do essentially make an accommodation and say, for a person who is gay, for a person who is trans, the best way that they can walk that out, the best way that they can live their sexuality in a whole way that honors God, given the natural fallenness, is to allow for this adaptation of same-sex marriage, of being transgender. And that brings the most honor to God, given the situation. And there are a lot of people who believe this. They don't think it's a lot different from the way we might alter someone's body because of a disability to give them a greater ability to improve their lives, to help them to better integrate with their community, better follow God, just to experience a more full and abundant life. So there's a lot of people who take this approach, and this is an affirming approach. And then others would believe in more of a celebration model. So this might more say, this isn't really a matter of fallenness. This is part of the beautiful diversity of God's creation. God created us in such a way that, the human genome, the way it works, is in such a way, and the whole process of having children and all the hormones, it's just such a way that God foresaw that this was going to happen. And this is actually a way of glorifying God. And far from being a sin or a temptation, this is actually an opportunity for the church to love the other, to love people who are different, in fact, than themselves. And that this is actually the core of the gospel, to care and love for everybody, not just people who are like us, but even people who are different from us. And so people with this perspective, and actually with both of these two affirming perspectives, could feel that the way the church responds to the LGBTQ community really says more about heterosexual Christians than anything else. Really says a lot more about their ability to reflect the love, grace, and acceptance of God. And I would say in many ways that also extends to side B people. In fact, in many ways, I would argue that I I, as an affirming person, feel much closer to the viewpoint of side B people, especially side B people who are part of the LGBTQ community. I feel much closer to them than, based on my conversations with my friends who are side B, how they feel in terms of their closeness to side X, to people who want to fix people and make them not gay anymore. So, we talk about as if there's two sides. There's affirming and not affirming. But really, the closeness between people who are side B and side A can be a lot closer even than people who want to fix gay people who just stigmatize and villainize, or even people who just want the issue to go away and are advocating for silence and don't want us to ever talk about who we are. So there is so much nuance in this picture. And now that you see it, you can see on my channel, I've done a lot of critiquing, actually, of side of those who want to fix gay people, of the side X, and those who want to silence gay people. That's mostly what I've addressed on this channel, although I've talked about the theology as well. But I think you can see that there's so much more nuance in this conversation. And if you're not sure where you stand theologically, and you're not sure how any of this fits together, what I would really recommend is that you shift away from trying to fix LGBTQ people, from trying to make us straight, from trying to make us cisgender, and switch away from wanting to silence us, but that you allow us to live with integrity as who we are in the church. I would really hope, and I pray, that if you are new to this subject, that you can shift and move in that direction, and recognizing that there can be a lot of friendship, a lot of goodwill, and just a lot of common heart sharing between people, even if they disagree on being affirming or not being affirming. What is really more difficult for the ability of even to be in relationship is this deep stigmatizing of the idea that being LGBTQ is irredeemable, that it needs to be fixed, that it needs to be changed, when it can't be fixed and it can't be changed, because God just doesn't seem to be doing that. If you're paying any attention to what's happening, you'll recognize, I'm not saying that God can't do that, but for some reason God doesn't seem to be doing that. So how about we follow God's lead on this? So there can be a lot more compassion in relationship between people who are not being stigmatized and trying to fix or trying to silence. So where do you stand on this? Are you trying to fix? Are you trying to silence? Are you accepting of the reality of the integrity of people who are LGBTQ in the church, even if they are not affirming? Do you believe it's an accommodation that we need to make people's lives better? Or do you believe in fully celebrating LGBTQ people as God's intention and God's desire to express the character of God? Where do you stand? I hope that this has been clarifying to you of different positions, different ways to approach this and frame this with people. Thanks so much for being on my channel. And remember, no matter how many questions you have, the core of this thing is that God loves you and accepts you, and the grace of God covers you whether or not you get these questions right. So thank you for joining us. Do not forget to subscribe, and surely you know somebody who will benefit from this information, who this is just going to blow their minds and really help them. So please share this with them, and I will see you later.